Hello everyone, Eb here with Tech Motorsports, and here we got an E36 M3, and this car was inquired for two things: weekend car and track days. So I will go through on everything that we're going to be replacing, and behind the camera, there's just a plethora of boxes of all the stuff that's going to be done to the car. So from the front, we're going to go ahead and work on and do radiator, coolant hoses. We're going to swap out the OBD2 intake with an OBD1 intake. There's a bunch of other stuff in there that we're going to be doing as well that I forget off the top of my head, but we will get to that part as I go start replacing them on the car. And on the rear section of the car as well, what we're going to be doing is the rear subframe, not the rear subframe, I apologize, the actual bushings for the rear subframe. We're going to be doing the reinforcement on the subframe itself for the sway bars. We're going to be doing the suspension, sway bars, bearings, bushings, ball joints, all that stuff. So we're pretty much going to go through and refresh the whole entire car. Now also, TC just left here. We went through a few other items on, this is what we're going to have apart, this is what we're going to do, and there was a few other items that we decided to go ahead and do while the car is here and torn apart. There are other couple items that are on order, and we feel, or he feels, that they're not going to be coming in on time. So that will be something that we can do at a later point. So yeah, so let's look at the boxes of joy that I have here for the car. All right, so we have a spare rear subframe and a spare front subframe that we're going to be modifying those or reinforcing them and installing them on the car. We also have the rear section of the exhaust, just the rear section, sway bars. We have the KW suspension, and in the box down below we have the intake manifold kit to do the installation from an OBD2 to OBD1, and the oil filter housing, oil cooler lines, bunch of heater hoses, coolant hoses, radiator. Yeah, we pretty much got a lot of stuff done. The bushings that we'll be using are AKG pretty much throughout the whole entire car. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we're going to do to the car. As I stated, it's not going to be a full designated track car. It's going to be a weekend / track car. So we want to make sure we keep everything intact. This is the interior still going to be in there. But yeah, there is a lot more stuff that we want to do down the road. But at this point, we're just going to take this most of this stuff and get this knocked out. Another thing, what I'm going to end up doing is I'm not going to break everything open right now, because I'm going to need this specific area to tear apart the rear subframe, get the differential out, and get all that separated. So I am going to go in and just do the those pieces that I'm going to install, and I'll break it down on a later clip. So yeah, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start getting the car ready. She's pretty much almost positioned on the lift, and going to start removing some parts. So stay tuned. All right, so there we have the fuel tank is out, and so is the subframe. Now, this is the first car that I've had an issue with one of the adjustable or the lower control arm bolts. I know I've seen and heard of people having issues, and they were seized up. The driver's side was seized up pretty much had to take the ball joint completely apart to be able to get the lower control arm out. Now, the reasoning that I did that way was because normally when I end up doing this, I don't replace the brake lines, or I technically keep the whole brake system intact. So what I do is I lower the lower control arm so I can get the brake caliper through and off to the side and out of my way when I drop the rear subframe. Now, at the time, we were not going to be doing brake lines, but after having TC here and going over a couple other items and stuff that I found, like the glebo is cracked, so that's going to be coming, and also we're going to replace the cinder bearing. So we have another order coming of more parts. So after discussing a few stuff, he decided he'll going to go ahead and pull the trigger and get steel braided lines. So didn't have to do it, but I'm glad I did do it, because it would have been a little bit easier for me to do it while I was up on the car instead of down on the floor. So yeah, so that was a pain in the butt, needless to say, but finally got it taken care of. As I stated before, here is the new rear subframe. All these items, so the reinforcement plate is going to be going on that, And yeah, so let's look at all the new bits and pieces that we have for the car. So let's start off with what I've got here. That is the box, and it actually has those items in it. So this is the KW suspension that we've got that's going to go on the car. So let's take a quick gander at the table behind me with all the other components. Okay, so here we are. We got, let's start with the exhaust. We have the BMW World rear section only, because it's not a race car. That's the only section TC was able to get. So we got the whole kit. So it comes with the gaskets, all the hardware with the bolts and nuts, and also the new mounts for the exhaust itself. So we have front and rear sway bars, ST suspension, and then we have a lot of components from AKG, starting off with the lower control arms, the adjustable ones. We have those. We have all the bushings for the rear subframe, for the trailing arm, and then also for the differential. And then also got the AKG adjustable sway bar links. Now, this ST suspension did come with those, but they're a little bulky. But decided to go with these instead. Also, we've got from AKG is the shock tower mounting plates. So we got those, and then on the reinforcement side, we have for the rear subframe, we've got the sway bar, the sway bar reinforcement plates for the subframe, and then also on the reinforcement side, we have the trailing arm pockets for the chassis itself. Now, I do not have to worry about the reinforcement plates on the chassis itself. Those already came on the car, so don't have to worry about that. So that moves us on to the ball joints. These are the ball joints for the lower control arms, and then we have the bushings for the upper spring perch control arm. So we have those. TC got a little carried away. He started ordering a bunch of parts, but these are the bushings for the lower control arm. Thank goodness I don't have to worry about these, because those are a pain in the butt to install. I have yet to install a set, only because it's technically two pieces of metal. There's an insert you have to put in there so that way you can press them in. So thank goodness I don't have to worry about that. And then also not pictured, which I forgot, it's on the other table, I do have the hub bearings that are going to go in there, and yeah, that's the other items are done in that picture. And like I stated previously, we are doing some steel to brake lines, so we're going to be adding those. Those have been ordered. And then the other thing, and the last thing I think for now for the rear section is going to be the fuel pump system. So we're doing the dual pump system on the car. As anybody knows, the E36s, E46s as well. When you have the saddle tank, you do get fuel starvation when you go into a certain turns. So with the dual pump system, that eliminates all that. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything for the rear section of the car. So now the only thing I got to do is start prepping the chassis and prepping the rear subframe itself for all the reinforcement plates. So yeah, stay tuned for that. All right, so as you probably might have picked up, I didn't say anything about the differential, replacing any seals. I will not be doing that. What I'm going to probably end up doing is just kind of cleaning it up. But all the seals on there, being the pinion and the axle shaft seals, those are in good condition. They're not leaking. Neither is the gasket for the cover on the back. So TC is going to take care of that, and he says that if it does start leaking, he'll bring it back at a later point, or we'll just have somebody in his area take care of that. So yeah, I just wanted to get that across, and yeah, now let's get back to the chassis. Okay, so the AKG kit comes with two little pieces per ear for the sway bar, and on this one, what I had to do to get it on the subframe itself was I had to grind down certain areas to be able to get it in there. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get this piece to have a lot of contact on the subframe itself. So there was a little bit of grinding I had to do, which led me to I had to do more grinding on this section here. So let me take a picture of this. I'm going to show you of what it came in the kit, and then what I finished off, or what was the finished product when I end up grinding it down, so that way this piece fits in here, or this piece fits nice and snug around this area. So let's take a look at that real quick. And here is the piece that's going to be put on here. We'll take a look at that real quick and see how nice and clean I have the section all the way around. All right, so as you can see, there's a nice, good fitment all the way around. Left me enough room so that way when I do weld it, it goes all the way through, and I'll have a really good bite on both metals. Okay, so the rear subframe is done. I got the other sway bar bracket welded in place. I went ahead and treated some of the rust spots that were on there, and then I painted the rear subframe itself. So in between of all of that stuff, I went ahead and cleaned up and got the chassis itself for the trailing arm pockets prepped. Here are a few pictures of it completely clean with the undercoating completely removed. And so also got, which is very simple to do, I did my weld through primer on the reinforcement plates, and also already did the weld through primer on the chassis itself. So to remove the undercoating, what I end up using, I use my angle grinder with this nice tougher wire wheel. It gets it off pretty good. It does leave a huge mess, but it seems to be the item that I use the most that pretty much works better and cuts through all the undercoating. So yeah, so at this point, what I'm going to end up doing is installing these reinforcement plates on the chassis, and go from there. So stay tuned. All right, a lot of welding and a lot of grinding went down, and I also got the chance to put some primer on there. So just to give you an idea, and I'm going to run through what I end up doing. So by looking at the reinforcement plate, there's a lot of area to weld. There's a lot of openings, technically, is what I meant. So what I ended up doing is I went online first to look at AKG and see what they end up doing, but they didn't really show too much of an installation on how they welded it, where, blah, blah, blah. So I took it upon myself to do what I did. So what I ended up doing is I welded the inside perimeter of the whole pocket itself, and then also the whole outside perimeter. Now with the points where the bolts go through, I went ahead and filled that in and grinded that down and smoothed it out. And on the holes that are here, I didn't fill those completely in. What I ended up doing is I spot welded those in. There's 2 spots in each one. At that point, if I would have welded all the way around and tried to make it smooth, it's overkill. I didn't want to go over that, but technically, because of how smaller or the area of it, and being welded inside and out, inside of here and then the outside perimeter, that was sufficient enough. Now by doing so, by cleaning everything out, I noticed that once I've gotten all this welded, that the tabs here, or the actual plate that is OEM, you could see them here all the way through here. And what I ended up doing is I stitch welded that area on both sides, so that way that is not now a weak point, because you got to think, all these little tabs, they're all spot welded into place. So I end up doing that, and yeah, so the next step I'm going to end up doing is adding the seam sealer and then throwing a little bit of body paint. Unfortunately, the body paint is going to stick out like a sore thumb under all this dirtiness, but unfortunately I'm not going to, or actually part of the deal was not to go completely clean this whole underneath, but yeah, I try to make it look a little nicer, because down the road it's going to get all dirty and it's going to just all blend in. So yeah, I'm going to get to that. All right, so a lot of welding and a lot of grinding went down. I also was able to go ahead and add the primer paint to it. So let's go through what I end up doing. Now, I did go online on AKG just to see, what their product was, the installation, but there really wasn't much there. So I just took it upon myself to do it the way I would want to do it, and just to make sure that this item, the reinforcement plate, is going to work 110%. So what I end up doing is I welded the whole inside perimeter of the the bucket, and then, or the pocket that is, and then the reinforcement plate, and then also welded the whole outside perimeter of that as well. Now what I end up doing also on where the bolts go through for the trailing arm bracket, I welded around that perimeter as well, grinded it down, smoothed it so it's a nice smooth area, so it slides nicely and easily when it needs to be aligned. And also on the holes that are sitting here, I didn't do a full weld all the way around. What I ended up doing is I did 2 weld spots on each one, because I feel from welding the inside perimeter and the outside is sufficient enough. So now that that all said and done and I got it all welded, I went back, and what I ended up doing is I stitch welded this little area here. And the reason why was I could see where the OEM pocket is at. So just to make sure that this wouldn't be a weak point, I went ahead and stitched welded, and I did both sides that way. So yeah, my next step is going to be the seam sealer and then doing some body paint. Unfortunately, the body paint is going to stick out like a sore thumb on this thing since it's completely dirty underneath, but unfortunately it wasn't part of the gig to completely clean and scrub this whole thing down and throw some body paint on it. But yeah, so I'm going to end up doing that, and stay tuned. I will be working also on the front cross member since I have my welder out. I will do something with that. I've already did like a pre-fitment, and I'm going to tweak it up a tad bit. So yeah, stay tuned. All right, so front cross member, went ahead and removed all the paint in the little pocket here for the motor mount. Got all that taken care of. Also already sprayed weld through primer on them, and same thing with the little inserts. I already had and clearanced them so that way they fit in there nicely, and I've already added weld through primer on those as well. I want to make sure that any moisture gets in there, there's no rust or anything of that sort that happens down the road. So what I ended up using was a stock motor mount that I had. It's going to help me kind of keep it in place to make sure everything aligns correctly when I do my spot welds and then weld it completely in. I will touch base a little later on this. This is the piece that goes here in this area. This is the one that I'm having. I wish the fitment was just a tad bit better, but I have a few ideas. I just don't know which one I'm going to go with. But yep, let me go ahead and get those spot welded in place, and then see you in a bit. Well, I got carried away. The front cross member is done and even painted. So yeah, so let me go through what I end up doing now. If you remember on a previous clip, I mentioned this section here. There was a couple different ways I was going to end up doing it, but and the reason why I was trying to think of a different method was this section down here is curved a different way than this section up here. So it was kind of like one angle, one thing would not be touching correctly. This will be too much of a gap, and there was a huge gap here. So after looking at it and grinding this down and trying to get it to fit, I decided to go this route, and I was able to make it work. So what I end up doing is on the chassis, or I'm sorry, on the cross member right here, I end up cutting a slot out so I could have a nice circular slot right here for the socket to go through. So I'd end up doing that, so I cut into that. And what I ended up doing was welded all the way across, and then I ended up hammering this section here down and then welded it. It actually was a nice good tight fit. So yeah, it actually came out a little bit better than I was anticipated, but she is in there and it is done. So yeah, just going to go ahead and play away with the rest of the stuff. So all right, everyone, so here we are. The subframe is done. So the bushings have been installed. I also installed the differential bushing as well. So the way I went about it was I just used a rubber mallet and smacked them in place, and that was it. The front diff one, I removed the center insert, then I smacked it in with the rubber mallet, and then I installed the aluminum insert, and she's all said and done. So yeah, so I've gone through all the components. So the assembly that you saw previously is completely torn apart. Every part has already been cleaned, sanded down, and also have been painted. So with the process that I end up doing with this, because I do not have a bead blaster nor a sand blaster, what I end up doing is I throw the parts in my parts cleaner. get those completely clean, get all the grease and grime off of it. Then I go ahead and wash those down with brake cleaner so I can get most of that oil substance from the parts cleaner. And then I sand them down, or I use a wire wheeler. So I have a couple steps that I end up using a wire wheel to get everything cleaned up. So the first one is that I end up using is a 2-inch one. This is what it looks like when they're new, and this is what it looks like when they're done. So yeah, go through that one as well. So this is that's a 2-inch one, and then I also end up using a 1-inch one as well to get into a little bit more tighter crevices. And also, this is what it looks like when I first start off with it, and this is what it looks like when I'm done. Now I still keep these because the pointy area helps me get into a nice little tight little areas as well, to be able to get all the grime and dirt and grease out of it. And of course also my trusty scuff pad. Use that for certain areas that I gotta touch up that the wire wheel's probably not the ideal for. So yeah, so that's what I pretty much do to all the components, and even the bolts. The bolts themselves I clean. As you can see, the bolts here are all painted. They're silver. They're not ugly, nasty looking rust. That's pretty much that whole subframe was just surface rust and all of that stuff. So it is spray paint. It's not gonna last forever, but it'll look so much better when these are installed instead of these ugly, nasty looking things. So on my Champ car, I have these painted on my Champ car, and a bunch of those parts we always remove and reinstall, and the paint has held up okay. And the big thing about it is none of those bolts are rusted. So that was the whole key. I just did not want rusted bolts. So yeah, so that's how I end up doing it, and I do pretty much almost every bolt. So it's a lot of time of sitting there with a wire wheel, and because I have a wire wheel on the bench grinder. Yeah, it's a lot of work. So now that all my components, as you can see, I got my trailing arm bushings here already painted, already hanging. That's already been cleaned, and then I also have some components in the back right here, which are the brackets for the control arms. So not control arms, the brackets for the trailing arms. So now what I was going to end up doing is I got most of this assembled, just sitting in here, and the next thing I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to finish, or not finish, I'm just going to start and install the dual pump system on the fuel tank. So that's where I'm going to end up doing next, so that way I could go ahead and have the fuel tank installed, and then that way I could finish assembly and everything else up here. So yeah, so that's what I'm going to jump on next. So let's get to it. Okay, but before we do that, let's take a look at the trailing arm pockets on the chassis and look at the finished product on that. Okay, so the trailing arm pocket, this is just the one side, and yeah, pretty much got everything all cleaned up. I've added the seam sealer, got it all the way around on everything that I removed, even here, and yeah, just gave it a little bit of a body paint. It's not the exact same body paint, but it will do. Like I mentioned before, it's going to get nice nasty down underneath here, but at least we're starting with a nice clean slate. So yeah, so I'm going to keep plugging away at other items. I just got to think of which item I'm going to jump on next. So stay tuned for that. She is all complete. So both fuel pumps are installed. The driver's side one is locked in the right position, so where the float doesn't hit anywhere inside there. And all the hoses have been installed with the new clamps and the reducers, both with the 12 mil hoses and the 8 mil hoses. So yeah, so I didn't go into great detail on this, but I did do a separate video on this full install, kind of more of a breakdown, and also how the system works. And if you want to look at that video, the link is here in the corner. So take a look at that if you are interested. At this point, I'm just gonna throw it back in the car, and once that is done, like I said, I'll worry about the electrical portion of that a little bit later, and that way, once this is in, I could go ahead and start assembling the whole rear subframe. There is still a lot more work that needs to be done to the front end, so I can't wait to be done with the back end. So yeah, so stay tuned. All right, so the fuel tank is back in. The vent lines have been connected to the vent canister in the back, so all of that is done now. So the next step, what I'm going to be doing is, if you look down toward the bottom of the clip, you can see the differential and both trailing arms and the axles. So all the bearings and the ball joints and the trailing arm bushings have been installed, and the axles have been cleaned as well. Those have just been cleaned. The trailing arms and the differential have been painted. If you remember in a previous clip that that diff didn't look as pretty as it does now. So got the bushings installed in that as well, and cleaned up and painted it, and she looks like a gem. I did not do anything with the seals. That could be done down the road. As of they're not leaking at this point. So we just figured, you know, let's take care of the other stuff, because there is a laundry list of stuff that's getting done to this car. So we didn't want to have to sit here and nitpick every single little item. But yeah, so now that all of this is pretty much ready to be installed, I will be installing the differential next and getting that up into place. And then I will be installing the CV axles, or the axles on the trailing arms, and then installing them at one piece. So yeah, so the rest of the items have come to finalize the brake, so I'll be taking care of that here soon. So yeah, let me keep plugging away. Here we are. The rear end is done. Well, for the most part, it's done. There's still a few stuff I need to do, but yeah, she's all back together now. All the pieces that we saw originally were all installed now. I still need to do some tightening, which I will work through that, most likely on the suspension components part. Those I will tighten once I have a load on there, the regular ride height, and then I'll tighten those down. And yeah, so as you can see, I've also gone ahead and did the caliper and also did the rotor, painted those, cleaned those up. It just the rotor looked bad. Just everything else all nice and shiny, and the rotor just all rusted. So I went ahead and cleaned that up. I put a very thin coat on the surface here, because what I want to do is I want to put the wheel on, and I want to be able to get that to make contact, torque down, and that way it makes a spot and clean some of the paint off, and then I'll go back and re-clean it, get to a little point, and that way it is technically metal to metal, or aluminum, or the rim to the disc itself. So the guide pins, the brass guide pins, have been installed from Burma World. As you can see, I do not have my clips installed here, per the instructions that Burma World has, not to install those clips on there, which helps you know, on the OEM side, guide the caliper when it slides in and out. On previous, on my E36, my Champ car, I installed those only because what ends up happening is I get better pad wear, even pad wear, when I have those installed. There's still a little bit of play in there, to where I do get uneven pad wear. So I will talk to TC and see what he wants to end up doing, maybe run it this way and then install the clips at a later point and see what happens. But the rears are not so much the problem, it's the front that takes more of the braking force. So that one you can end up seeing the brake pads start to wear unevenly. So yeah, so as you can tell, also I've got covers, heat shield on the brake lines, the ones that are closest to the rotors themselves. I will be installing that as well on the front ones when they get to that point. So yeah, so the sway bars in, like I said, there's still some stuff I need to tighten down. That's one of the items that I still have a little bit loose, and yeah, the only thing left on the rear end now is doing the cylinder bearing on the drive shaft, and then installing the exhaust, and that's pretty much about it. So yeah, let me keep plugging away at that. The cylinder bearing has been installed now on the drive shaft, so the drive shaft's now installed. Got the heat shield for there installed as well, and got the lovely exhaust installed as well. Now the exhaust is snugged. It's not completely tightened, because as I was putting it up there, I realized I may have to take it back off, so that I can access the bolts for the suspension once I get ready to put the load on there and get that done. So oh well. But at this point, the rear end is pretty much done. There's no more parts to install. There is one small little thing I need to get, is 2 clips that hold the O2 sensors, or the rear O2 sensors for the car. Those, when I took them off originally, they came off kind of easy. I didn't even look at those. Well, I took a look at them when I went to go install them, and the reason why they came off easily, they just rusted through. So yeah, I got to get those 2 clips. No big deal. But yeah, she is technically done at this point, and it is time to start concentrating on the front end of the car. So it's gonna be it's time for that. Now I've already done a little bit of work, but the fun part will begin here soon. So that's it for the back end. And guys, I appreciate you watching. And like always, to help the channel out, please hit the like button and subscribe. And see you in part 2, which is going to be the front. There's a lot of work to be done up front. So see you soon, guys.